Hi guys! This week I am going to be painting a figure from the 7 Years' War for you, which I believe is a period that I've actually never covered before on this channel. The model that I specifically got a hold of for this video is this guy. He's a British musketeer. He is by Frontrank Miniatures, which is also a manufacturer I don't think I've ever painted before. So hooray, I guess, for new things. Now, the uniform from this period is not substantially different for the most part from what you get kind of later in the 18th century, so kind of like during the American Revolution, for example. But some nationalities changed up what they were wearing more than others did. For example, the Prussian army during the 7 Years' War has very, very similar uniforms to what you see being used by the Hessians during the AWI. But on the other hand, the Brits, like we're going to be painting today, made some much more substantial changes to their uniform in that period. The 7 Years' War, Brits have much wider cuffs on their jackets. There's a lot more braiding and decoration than there was later, even on just general sort of low-ranking infantrymen, and that braiding and decoration is generally wider and thicker, and you'll just look at it and it will feel quite a bit different to the later uniform. But actually, I have to admit, from my perspective, it's actually a bit more fun to paint that way because it's just bolder, it's more colorful, it's more flashy, and I really like the cut in general of 18th century uniforms, but that fact that it's just a little bit more showy, I guess, makes it, I think, probably a more fun uniform to paint. Here are all the colors that you will need to complete this model. As always, I have not included the paints needed for painting the skin or hands. You can find details on that in one of my other videos. I'm going to start out by painting the cuffs and turnbacks on this model. Now, I've opted to make my figure a member of a royal regiment, which means that all of those areas are going to be a dark blue color. You're going to have to obviously do some research for the regiment you want to paint and figure out what colors you need to use here. Also, though, because this is a royal regiment, his pants are also going to be painted blue. Normally, with pretty much all the other regiments, that would be red, so just pay attention there. This base color I'm using is a mixture of dark Prussian blue and black from Vallejo. My first highlight on the turnbacks and cuffs is going to be just pure dark Prussian blue. And I'm building it up over a very dark base, so it's easy to just put down several layers here before you've kind of reached the full intensity that's possible with this color. In order to just get some more contrast, I've now taken some just pure Vallejo blue and mixed it into the Vallejo dark Prussian blue, and I'm going to use that to add some further highlights to those blue areas. And I'm really just focusing this color where I want it to look like there should be a little bit more light hitting. So towards the tops of all of these areas basically is what we're going to go for, and leaving the cracks and creases in the darker blue shade. I then just finished off very briefly with just a little bit of pure blue, but I kept that pretty sparing because I didn't want this getting too bright. Though really, as I said before, when you're laying over these very, very dark bases, you really will have to apply quite a few coats before you get your blue just too bright. Now I'm going to move on to the jacket and waistcoat. I am basing all of those areas using Vallejo Black Red. My first highlight on all of the red areas is going to be Mephiston Red from Citadel. Because this is a base color and pretty heavy, you're going to want to take some of it out of the bottle and cut it with a little bit of water before you start using it. I'm just making sure here that I apply a nice even layer, which means you're going to get a little bit of blotchiness. That's okay. Worry more that your coat is even. Once it's dry, you can go back in and build it up. As a matter of fact, you want to do that with these reds because they're quite transparent. So if you put on one thin layer and then go back over with other subsequent layers to add extra brightness and highlights to the jacket, that'll be a good way to get a rich and very sort of good depth of color. I then continue that process by using Citadel Evil Sun's Scarlet as my second highlight. And I'm just doing this exact same thing I did before with the Mephiston red. I am applying it in thin layers and building it up gradually just to get highlights in the areas where I want there to be highlights. So on the tops of wrinkles and folds and creases basically, and then trying to leave those sort of darker reds more down in the shadows, like under his arms and places like that. Now we're going to get to probably the most time-consuming part of this uniform, which is dealing with the white and gray areas. I have got Vallejo Sky Gray here, and I'm going to start out first by base coating his spats. They need a lot of coverage, of course, because we're working over a black base coat. So I'm going to apply one sort of thin, blotchy first coat, and then I'm going to go back over it a couple of times until my base coat is nice and even. You can even build up some thicker layers of it on areas where you know you're eventually going to get higher highlights, and then leave some of the areas down in creases and folds a little, intentionally I should say, a little darker from the base still showing through. Now this uniform has a lot of white piping on it, more than later uniforms. I encourage you to get some reference material so you know exactly where to put all of the piping, because some of it's molded on, but not all of it is. I'm taking the sky gray once again to do this, and I've just made sure that my paint is nice and thin so it really flows well, because it's super important for this fine lining work. I'm also using a number 0 brush here instead of my usual number 1, because for these really fine, delicate lines, you're really going to find it's easier to control and get good results. So, you know, there's obviously going to be piping on the sort of the front lapels of his jacket, and you know, trim around his pockets and his collar. You know, again, just look at a picture. His cuffs are probably worth especially noting. He has extra thick kind of piping, white piping on the blue cuff areas, and you can see I'm really exaggerating that at this point. I'm going to continue highlighting the spats now. I've made a mixture of white and the sky gray, and I'm going to be starting to sort of just build up highlights here. Now this is a highlight step that I'm not going to be doing on the piping and trim, because those areas I feel are so fine and thin that this extra layer is not necessary, but the spats are just bigger, so it's going to show more, so you know, you want more areas of blended color, in my opinion. So this is just sort of the secondary highlight for this layer, and as always, you're going to want to apply the color and sort of gradually build it up on areas where you're going to eventually want sort of a brighter, more highlighted look. I'm then going to move right on to highlighting the spats further using pure white. I thinned my paint down a lot here, and I'm just going to be building up thin, progressive layers over top of each other to, you know, really get the sort of subtle highlights that you want on a white item of clothing like this. It is time consuming to do this, to really get your white up to the brightest white, but just persevere here, because the results really will be worth it. You'll get a nice result, and you won't have to use lots of colors of paint to do this. I mean, we've really only worked with 2 colors, and we've only had to make that one intermediate intermediate mix to achieve these results. When I'm finished with the spats completely, I'm going to go back to highlighting all of the piping. I'm still using the thinned down white paint so that it, flows really well on these detail areas. And I've switched back again to my number 0 brush for this because it's so fine. And all I'm really doing here is going back over all of the areas I base coated with the sky gray and applying white. Obviously, if there's areas where the piping goes into shadow, you can leave them in the sky gray color, and in some places you may need to apply a couple of layers of white just to get enough brilliance, especially on, say, those really wide cuffs. A lot of those narrow areas, though, if you have enough paint on your brush, it'll usually be just, the white will just go on focused enough that you won't have to go back over it lots and lots of times, which is a good thing because obviously painting these fine little areas is pretty fiddly. Now, if you look at the piping on the cuffs, and as we saw already, it's really extra wide, but you'll see that actually a couple thinner bands, and there's actually a very thin kind of amount of blue that divides them. So what I've done here, or what I am doing, is I've taken some dark Prussian blue, I thinned it down a lot, and I'm taking that number 0 brush again, and I'm very, very carefully picking out a very faint, thin line, sort of to divide those thick bands of white in half. This is a little bit fiddly, actually it's a lot fiddly, and this is a good place to practice your brush control. But if you make some mistakes or get the lines a little too thick or uneven, you can always go back in with some white paint and tidy it up afterwards. So, don't get too scared, just give it a try. Now I'm going to move on to the black and leather areas on this model. So I've got some Vallejo black here. I'm going to first base coat his shoes, and then I'm going to do his sort of patch cases and his satchel, also with a black base coat, the scabbard for his sword, and also the base coat for his tricorn hat. The first highlight, which I'm going to apply to all these areas, is German gray, and I'm just going to go over them pretty generously. I didn't actually mention the last step, but I've also painted sort of black, bands there that sort of go around just above his knee. You see those in a lot of pictures, so I thought I would add them in. It adds a little bit of extra nice contrast to those white spats. I'm going to now continue highlighting further by mixing a little bit of sky gray into my German gray. The first layer shouldn't be too much. You want it to be subtle, and it's going to be going still on all of our gray areas here. And then I'm just going to kind of continue in the same way, adding in gradually more sky gray to build up highlights. Though after that step, I'm not going to apply any further highlights to the hat. And the reason is because the hat is sort of supposed to be fabric, it's not leather, and I don't want it to look too bright or too shiny. I want it to stay dark. So I'm really going to reserve those higher highlight shades for painting the shoes, the scabbard, and the shiny sort of leather cases. And you can kind of really build those up. I try to sort of build on the leather those shiny colors up on areas where I think light would hit and you'd get a little bit of reflection. So like the toes of the shoes, sort of the top edge of the scabbard, and sort of the sharp top edges too of the leather cases. You can even take one sort of final super high highlight of just pure sky gray and really just run it lightly along those sharp edges, and it'll just look like some light is really hitting and catching. We're not quite done yet with white and gray. I'm going to base coat his hair here using the sky gray again. Now, the way that the soldiers did their hair probably varied quite a bit based on the situation. Probably a fair amount of the time they would have even just had their normal hair color, but I suspect that at least sometimes they powdered their hair or wore a wig to make it look white. And I figure since this is a royal regiment, and therefore a little fancier and flashier than your usual, that maybe they'd be more likely to do this. So that's why they're getting this gray base coat and are going to have kind of gray-white hair. I'm also going to take this opportunity to use my gray paint to paint a sort of white band, or base coat I should say, this sort of white band that goes around the rim of his hat. Because I don't want the hair to get too brilliantly white compared to the rest, I'm going to apply a really light, even wash of Nuln oil and make sure that really gets down in all of the recesses. Now I'm going to go back to highlighting again, and I've just grabbed pure white here, and I'm going to be just building it up first along the rim, or that band along the rim of the hat. You can see it's a fairly wide band, so you can apply several layers probably and just get it sort of a little bit brighter in some areas, and where it sort of folds back you can make it a little bit darker. I'm going to highlight the hair using the white too, but I'm just going to apply it pretty lightly. I'm going to be kind of careful to really pick out like that braid at the back of his head and some of the individual strands. And I'm not going to layer it too much because I don't want it to get too bright white. I want his hair to look a little bit more gray, because I think if it gets too white, it's going to start looking a little bit artificial. It should look just a little bit more of this sort of more dirty color, I think, compared to the rest of the uniform. Now I think it's a really nice contrast to the rest of the stuff he's wearing, but that sort of big wide strap that holds his pouch is kind of a buff color. So I'm going to be base coating it here very carefully using Vallejo khaki. In order to highlight the band, I'm first going to apply a mixture of the khaki and some Vallejo beige. And you can see I'm just going to build that up lightly. And then after that, I'm going to move up just to pure beige, and I'm applying all these colors in just really thin layers. I sort of halfway through, I realized that he had a strap on his musket, and that should also be a similar beige color. So I just really quickly base coated it and then continued highlighting it in the same way as I was on the sort of strap. After building up several layers of the beige khaki mix and then just the pure beige mix, I then took the beige and lightened it further with some white, and I'm going to use that as the final highlight on his sort of shoulder strap and also on his gun strap. And again, I'm going to build up a couple layers here just to get some more interesting range of tones. Now for his musket stock. There's not a lot showing here, so I'm going to keep this real simple. I'm base coating the wood areas first using just pure Vallejo chocolate brown. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to take that khaki that I already had out, and I'm going to do a 50-50 mix with the chocolate brown and start layering that over top. And then sort of as a final finishing highlight, I'm just going to take pure khaki, though I'm going to keep it kind of thin so it doesn't get too intense right away. And I'm going to use that as a final light highlight over some of the areas of wood that are showing. But of course, the way he's holding the gun here, there's actually not a whole lot exposed, so it's fairly easy to do this. Now for the steel and sort of metal areas. I've made a base coat by mixing Vallejo air gunmetal with German gray, and I'm keeping it pretty dark to start. And I'm going to first base coat the rifle, or I'm sorry, the musket barrel the bayonet and sort of the locking mechanism on the gun. Additionally, he's got little buttons down the side of his spats, which in pictures are shown to just be a very dark color. So I'm just going to paint them in this very deep, sort of slightly metallic shade. And you just want to do this real carefully here. So you've got nice, round, even dots up and down his legs. There's other buttons on his cuffs too, and on his waistcoat and his jacket. And I'm going to sort of rough them in using the same color. Again, just be very careful because it's super important that you get these nice and even looking. And then I'm going to highlight the metal areas a bit more. I'm going to take some Vallejo Air, just pure gunmetal. I'm going to use that to lightly highlight the musket barrel and lock, and also the bayonet. Then I'm going to take some Vallejo Air Chrome, but you could also use silver or steel. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to use that to make all the buttons on his jacket and cuffs and waistcoat really bright and shiny, because they're supposed to be just kind of a bright, shiny metal color. Though I'm not going to do that on the sort of buttons along his legs. I'm going to leave those dark. I'm also going to use that really bright color to add a final shiny finish to the end of his bayonet. The gold brass areas on this figure are really minimal. They just include the buckle in the front of his shoulder strap, a little sort of clip on his gun strap, and just the tip of his scabbard. I have made a base here of chocolate brown and Vallejo Air gold, which I'm going to carefully apply to those areas. And I'm just going to do a really quick, dirty highlight just using the pure Vallejo Air gold. Okay, so here is our finished 7 Years' War British musket man. This figure did not take, I didn't think, very long, especially for an 18th century model. They often do take a while to paint. On the other hand, I mean, I don't know. I'm on the fence about the results of this. Whatever it is, I just don't seem to paint 18th century figures as well. For some reason, I have some kind of curse or something. I'm not saying it looks bad. I think it looks pretty decent, actually, but it's just not as amazing as I think it could have been. Maybe I should have put some more time into highlighting, shading on the jacket and spats. I don't know. But I think this should in any way give you a pretty good idea about how to handle some of these units. And I did really enjoy painting him a lot more than I did, say, AWI stuff. His uniform was more fun, and the piping was just a little bit more interesting to do. So if you like this video, please like it, share it, leave me comments with what you thought. Maybe you liked it better than I did, or maybe you thought I did a terrible job. I don't know. I'm eager to hear what you think. Of course, you can also subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. That's always appreciated. And I think that's all for now, so I'll see you next week.